Hello, welcome to Rappler Talk. I'm Marites Vitug, and joining us is Attorney Jose Agcaoili, President of the Philippine Bar Association, the oldest voluntary lawyers group in the Philippines. But he's not the oldest lawyer who's a member of the bar. Welcome to Rappler Talk, Attorney Agcaoili. Thank you for making time for this. And as we're going to discuss today the issue of seeking justice for your slain colleagues. And so far, there have been 34 lawyers and judges killed only during this administration. But as we talked about earlier, this is nothing new because since 1993, 29 judges have been killed. So as PBA, as the oldest voluntary lawyers group, I'm sure you have been watching this. And what do you think, what factors led to this phenomenon of killings of lawyers and judges?
Well, the work of judges is fraught with serious risks. They handle very acrimonious and sensitive cases involving life, liberty, and property. And as in all legal battles, one side will win, the other side will lose. And in many cases, some litigants or parties accused in criminal cases do not operate within the confines of the law and tend to, take things in their own hands and resort to extrajudicial measures to vindicate or even take revenge on, say, judges, or lawyers. It's very tragic, but it's a sad indictment of our criminal justice system.
So these litigants who lose, there is no fear of the law or what can happen to them, like the consequences of taking the law in their hands?
I interviewed sources from the Philippine Judges Association, from the PNP, and you would be surprised, even terrified at some of their findings. First and foremost is the rampant proliferation of criminal syndicates and guns for hire, which is a thriving business all over the country. Nowadays, there are even brokers and or handlers for assassins all over the country. And price is driven by supply and demand. And these operatives, these assassins, they do not care about rule of law concerns. They operate outside of the law. And those that hire them may even be convicts serving time in prison. And so there is no fear, there is no respect for the criminal justice system.
But this is not new. I mean, is this just like under the Duterte administration, or have we seen this in past administration?
Oh no, this is not new at all. And as you have pointed out, I think it was in the 9 years of the GMA administration that there has been the highest number of extrajudicial, or shall we say, killings of judges and lawyers. There was one in the time of under President Erap. There were about 7 under the time of President Aquino, 3 so far under President Duterte. It's not peculiar to this administration. It's unfortunate, but yes, this is widespread and prevalent. It has become a very sad plight of our criminal justice system. But
18 were killed under the 9-year administration of President Arroyo. Also
Right.
because she ruled for 9 years.
Correct.
Yes, but having recognized this as a problem, among lawyers like you know, who sit in big law firms or medium-sized law firms, what can groups like you do, like the Philippine Bar Association?
Well, the criminal justice system is founded on, say, 3 ramparts. First is law enforcement, and that involves the PNP and NBI. Second is, of course, the National Prosecutorial or National Prosecution Service under the DOJ, and then there's the courts. See, the dilemma, the paradox that we are faced with as lawyers is that we live and breathe the mantra of the rule of law. But that ideal is predicated on these 3 ramparts of the criminal justice system working together efficiently. If there are no witnesses to a crime, or if there is no physical evidence, or if the evidence is tainted, or the thread or chain of evidence is in any way compromised, then there will not be enough case buildup to proceed to an indictment by the prosecution service on the basis of a finding of probable cause, and much less will these cases reach the courts. If they do, they most likely will result in dismissals. Now, the PBA is at the forefront of all these efforts towards improving criminal justice system and supporting legislation that which tends to or will improve the administration of justice in the country. In terms of solutions to the problem of killings of judges particularly, we have been closely studying the revival of the old concept of special marshals or Philippine marshals, depending on from what point of view you see it. No? The concept of special marshals was formulated by senior Supreme Court Justice Antonio Carpio, and I understand that former senior congressman from Ilocos, no? Rodolfo Fariñas, also conceived and made some headway into getting Congress to legislate the creation of these special marshals, which are essentially an elite force of armed professional state security operatives intended to provide protection to judges. For instance, the retirement age of police and military is quite young.
56, right?
55 or 56 in the case of
yeah.
PNP, and same age, or maybe 60 in the case of military.
56.
56 also.
Yes.
So these officers retire at the prime of their professional careers, and they're quite vital still and very, very, shall we say, vigorous. They would be of utmost importance and assistance in the efforts of the Supreme Court, say, to come up with this elite force under the supervision and control and the funding of the Supreme Court to provide protection to judges.
So, but this has not yet been implemented, no?
It has been formulated, conceptualized, but somehow it slipped through the cracks of the government bureaucracy. But perhaps this is something that the newly appointed Supreme Court Chief Justice can look into, because I think all it would take is additional funding for, from Congress to enable the Supreme Court to create an office under the auspices of, say, the Office of the Court Administrator,
Correct.
the OCA.
Yes, yes.
These special forces, or shall we say special marshals, will have not only the power to hire, train, and supervise protection for the judges, no? But also coordinate with law enforcement to follow up the progress of cases.
Yes.
And also coordinate with lawyers groups like the IBP and the PBA, who may be appointed by the Supreme Court from time to time to either prosecute or defend in cases involving judges or lawyers.
So what about the proposals? I think this has happened before, judges training themselves to, what do you call this, sharpshooting?
Yes, yes, yes,
So
yes.
is that advisable for
Well,
them to bear arms?
Judge Felix Reyes of the Philippine Judges Association, he's the president, has informed us that the PNP has actually relaxed the rules on judges carrying firearms and made it easier for them to be licensed, expediting the the time required. But this would probably allow judges or their companions in the form of their branch sheriffs and
Yes.
process servers maybe to carry one firearm at a time, which is really nothing compared to high-powered firearms
Yes.
of guns for hire, riding in tandem. So I think yes, it is a serious problem which the three branches of government must address as a matter of urgent intervention.
How about lawyers among your ranks? They're also being killed like judges,
Yes.
prosecutors too.
Yes, yes, yes. That's tragic. We are non-combatants
Yes.
in the in the war against drugs or criminal syndicates, and by and large, lawyers live by the code of professional responsibility. They play by the rules, and there are rotten apples in the basket, that's for sure, but there are sanctions for these scoundrels and scalawags. No? There is, of course, the disbarment or other
Yes.
disciplinary proceedings before the Supreme Court and the IBP. The same goes for judges. There are also cases investigated by the Supreme Court involving, say, corruption in the
Yes,
judiciary.
exactly.
In other words, killing should not be an option, much less in the cases involving judges who really live monastic lives, far removed from the social niceties that ordinary people enjoy. They tend to keep among themselves and their families and work really tremendous burdens, workloads of say 500, 600 cases a day for trial court. I mean, a month for trial court judges, and they toil thanklessly, and because of the nature of their work, they are criticized, maligned by losing litigants, and it's unfair because the slightest whiff of, say, scandal tends to, stick, and stay with them forever, even if it's totally undeserved. They really have no way of protecting their honor and worse, their own personal safety because of work-related risks.
You were talking earlier about how the Supreme Court is weeding out corruption, no, among judges. They have their own investigating
Yes.
process,
Right.
and I think that's related to the cause of the killings, because some people say that judge was corrupt or maybe accepted favors from one party, was seen as unfair. So to take out that cause of killing, so it would be really benefit the judges and everyone as well if corruption were really reduced to a minimum.
Correct. And the greater responsibility for this really falls on the shoulders of the Supreme Court.
You're right.
It is the last bastion of for justice. It's a self-evident fact. The executive holds the sword, the legislature holds the purse, and the justice system, the judiciary, is the blindfolded lady holding the scales of justice, and really has no way of enforcing or protecting its own people. And so the capital, the moral capital of the judiciary is in its integrity and the trust bestowed upon the citizenry, upon its judges. And so that's the only way that the judiciary can work in a manner that engenders belief and respect among the people. No? And that's the great responsibility of the Supreme Court, weeding out what the Arab administration referred to as hoodlums and rogues.
Yes. I think the good news is there was a recent announcement by the longest acting Chief Justice in this country that the Supreme Court has recently formed a body, a permanent body, to investigate all corruption reports against judges, justices. I think up to the Court of Appeals, because they are not impeachable officers, right? It's only the Supreme Court.
That's correct.
So that's good news. I think that's being formed now, and it will be no longer ad hoc unlike before.
Yes.
So I think that's a good step, but let's see how it evolves, because it's still about to be set up.
Absolutely, absolutely. There are many reforms that need to be done to strengthen the faith of the people in the judiciary, particularly. And a lot of it takes concerted effort between the bench and the bar. And this is where lawyers' organizations like the PBA come in, and the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, Philippine Judges Association, and the Prosecution Service. We should be able to get our acts together and find a way to come up with legislation and changes in the criminal justice system to make justice more efficient, the disposition of cases faster, and unclogging of dockets and jails, for instance, overcrowded jails, also more efficient. The regional trial court judges, for instance, last Monday and last Tuesday celebrated what they call Judgment Day.
Judgment Day?
Yes. In one day, the president of Philippine Judges Association, for instance, was able to decide and render judgment on 93 cases. And
in one day?
in one day, yes. And the day after that, he was able to resolve 83 cases. And that in large part was made possible by plea bargaining, which is now an approved and systematic approach to getting rid of cases involving, say, small-scale drug possession. Whereas, for instance, a small-time drug user was caught with possession of less than 5 grams
Yes.
of crystal meth or shabu. The prosecution, represented by the city prosecutors under the DOJ, are now able to bargain for sentences of, say, under 6 years to these detainees accused of dangerous drugs
So
violations.
there's no extended trial?
It will definitely expedite, and it has expedited trial, because even at the arraignment stage, there can be a plea bargain to, say, get a detainee to admit guilt, provided that he goes through rehabilitation for a period of 6 months through the local government units' respective rehab programs. And then after that, if he is reformed, he can even apply for probation. If he is a first offender, for instance, then he does not have to go to jail, which is a much better solution than seeing them gunned down in the streets like dogs. This is consistent with the reformative principle of the criminal justice system.
So for judges, in terms of disciplining them or supervising them, there's a process which the Supreme Court handles.
Absolutely.
For lawyers, you have disbarment.
Yes.
How about prosecutors?
Well,
I mean, what happens to prosecutors who are, not doing their job well, or
Right.
maybe have poor skills?
Right. The process of disciplining prosecutors is even more expeditious, because they are under the supervision, and they are essentially employed by the Department of Justice.
Yes, yes.
So there are administrative sanctions which may be imposed upon them in much faster time than it takes, for instance, to undergo investigation or trial for a judge or a lawyer, who undergo disciplinary proceedings. The Secretary of Justice has carte blanche authority to reshuffle, dismiss, and do as he wishes in the interest of the speedy and effective administration of justice under his department.
So as I asked you earlier, I think before the interview proper, I was asking about the profile of your members.
Yes.
Because my impression is you're all rich corporate lawyers. So how do the killings affect you? How do the killings of judges and your colleagues? I think mostly in the provinces, though. How do this affect the PBA?
Yes. Our membership is made up of 700 lawyers all over the country. Out of that, we probably have an active membership of about 200 to 250 that regularly attend our fellowships, symposia, and seminars. But the core is really a group of 15 to 20 trustees and advisors. We come from the, shall we say, more prominent law firms in Metro Manila, but we also have a growing membership in the provinces, and we are gravely concerned about all these developments, because well, of how it erodes the rule of law, which we fashion ourselves as champions and vanguards. Since the time the PBA was created in 1891, and since
1891.
yes, it's older than the Supreme Court. Yes.
Oh.
And we have among our founders and previous presidents distinguished leaders like Salonga, Diokno, Claro M. Recto, Jose Abad Santos. Some of them are still alive today. Ricardo Romulo. And so it is an honorable and hallowed tradition that is active and in the forefront of judicial reforms and ensuring that the preservation and the protection of the rule of law. That is our mantra. And that is why, as I said earlier, we are also bound by that principle. And so while it is easy to rush to judgment and speculate that maybe these killings are state-sponsored or made possible because of some philosophy in the administration, we are also careful not to rush to judgment because we bind ourselves to the rule of law, and that is made up of the procedural and substantive safeguards guaranteed by the Constitution.
Yes. To conclude this interview, Attorney Agcaoili, we'd like to give you the platform for your final statement.
Thank you. Yes. We do not wish to make class distinctions, but the unabated killing of judges and lawyers is a vicious and mortal assault on the very institution, the system that promises justice for all, regardless of race, sex, religion, political persuasion, or status in life, whether rich or poor. It tears up the moral fabric that binds us as one nation and one people. And this is very worrisome because we are actually at a crossroads. And this is uncharted territory. Never has the clarion call been sounded by lawyers and judges with such urgency. And so we respectfully implore all branches of government to come up with real, urgent, and effective interventions to address this concern and put an end to this madness, really, because at the very least, we should honor the great sacrifice, the supreme sacrifice that our brethren in the bench and bar have made so that their lives will not have been in vain. We need to put a stop to the killing of judges and lawyers now, because it is really, the alternative is anarchy, and this is not an option. And so thank you for giving us the voice and allowing the Philippine Bar Association to express its position.
Thank you, Attorney Agcaoili. And on that very thoughtful note, and you elevated the problem into more of institutions and, of course, national unity and where we're headed after this, because it's really madness. May I also add the killing of journalists as well. But I mean, it can happen to anyone. So thank you for elevating the discourse and for calling attention to this problem. Please join us again as we do Rappler Talk, and let's continue to think about the plight and seeking justice for fallen lawyers and judges.
Thank you.
Thank you.